Now, former Justice Secretary and first man to be knighted by Charles after he became king joins me now, Robert Buckland. Lovely to see you, Sir Robert.
Lovely to be here.
I must call you that. Now, tell me, what was it like to be the first man to be knighted by King Charles III?
Well, I thought it would be, just a wonderful day, but a normal investiture, and then
Yes.
to hear that it was the king was a big thrill for me and my parents and my son. And because of the order in which things were done, I happened to be the first bloke who was being
Amazing.
dealt with. Lady Sainsbury had the DBE first, quite right
Yes.
too, and then I was the number two. And it dawned upon me that I was the first man to be knighted by the king as king.
And did he say something to you? Did you have a little chat?
Oh yes, we have our chats when we see each other, and I have to say that I think nobody is better prepared to be
Yes.
king than this monarch. It's not just a question of waiting; he's prepared for this, and I get the sense that there is a serious sense of purpose. He's taking the job incredibly seriously.
I mean, we saw that yesterday. It looked so solemn, didn't
Well, he
he?
did, and it's a solemn ceremony. It's a religious ceremony laden with huge symbolism, that has been laid down through the centuries. Of course, you're going to take it seriously. But what I like about the king is that he's also able to not to take himself seriously and laugh at things and have
Same
that.
with the Queen Camilla, actually. They take the work seriously, but not themselves.
Yes, and that sense of humour, I think, carries them through their onerous public duties. I mean, who'd want that job?
No.
It's a job like no other, and it's a job that he's now, I think, ideally equipped to do.
I mean, you're a long-standing politician. Does it matter that he has expressed some pseudo-political views in the past, that we know what he thinks about all manner of things, be it architecture, the built environment, the environment in general? I mean, it's different to the Queen's approach, the late Queen's approach, isn't it?
Well, yes, but before he became king, he was interviewed some years ago in which he clearly stated that he knew that the job of being king was somewhat different from his previous role, and I think he accepted that, he acknowledged that, and everything that he's doing shows that he understands that the role of a constitutional monarch is a limited one, inevitably, but there are important functions. I think Bagehot described it in the 19th century as to encourage, to advise and to warn. And I'm sure that when it comes to this Prime Minister and future Prime Ministers, that's what the King will do.
And what's all this we hear about? A little bit of argy-bargy over who was invited yesterday, Robert. One former cabinet minister's there, one isn't. Boris Johnson and Carrie are front row. Some members of the cabinet are sat further back. Was there a little bit of competition over these invitations?
Well, look, I think a lot of us felt that we'd love to have been there, but there were only 2,000 seats.
So was it wrong? So, should all of the MPs in the House of Commons have been there?
Well, look, in 1953 there were 8,000 seats, but they built tiers and stadiums. If you look at Westminster Abbey, then they closed it for 6 months to rebuild it into some sort of Wembley Stadium. Clearly, that wasn't going to be possible this time, and therefore I think we all have to accept that it's right for the Buckingham Palace to make sure, and the Earl Marshal, to make sure there's a very good cross-representation of our society, and I think yesterday that was achieved in spades. You look at that congregation, and I thought there was a great sort of sense that civic society and people more generally were being well represented across the country through all the organisations that were there in the Abbey, and that's fine. And none of us should carp and quibble about that. This is a state occasion, showing Britain off to the world. I thought we did it very well.
And do you think it perhaps sets the Republican cause back a bit? We have seen quite a lot of polling this week. We know about the protests, which I'm going to ask you about in your capacity as a former Justice Secretary in just a moment. But obviously there's a kind of rising Republican sentiment among the under-30s, and that's been problematic for the monarchy in the past and could continue to be so. Do displays like this perhaps push the dial back in their favour?
I think they do. I think none of us, apart from our parents' and grandparents' generation, have seen a coronation. It was a great moment for people to actually view the symbolism and what it's all about. And I think that will have convinced a lot of people that whilst there are quirks and imperfections quite clearly in a constitutional monarchy, what's the alternative? President Blair?
Yes.
I think not.
President Lineker?
I think not.
But why are the Tories a bit shy about all this? Meant to be the party of patriotism. You've got people in the opposition who want to scrap the monarchy, surely you should be waving the Union flag at every opportunity, because of the representation here indicating that the not just silent majority, the cheering majority are in favour of this institution.
Well, yeah, do you know, I think actually not just the Conservative Party, but mainstream politics is in favour of the monarchy, and I think it has more power when actually it's people from all parties who are standing up and saying this works, why change it? This represents not just our great history, but it's also a sustainable model for the future.
Yes.
And I think that sort of cross-party support, that wellspring of support for the monarchy will endure, and that's why yesterday was another great milestone in the history of this institution.
Yes.
But looking forward, I think, to, God willing, a successful reign and a great future with His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales.
Now, not everybody was in support. There was quite a few protests yesterday. People perfectly entitled to protest, I think, in a fair and open democracy.
Yes.
There were some arrests, more than 50, and Graham Smith, the head of Republic, the anti-monarchy campaign group, ended up being thrown in the back of a police van. What do we think? Do we think the police were a bit too heavy-handed? They were in Trafalgar Square. There was an issue over a megaphone that Graham planned to use,
Right.
and also I think some clips on their clothing which were meant to be used for holding banners, but in fact the police misconstrued as perhaps them trying to chain themselves to railings.
Right.
Over the top, or?
Well, look, you told me more than I knew before I came into the studio. I think the police have a very difficult job on the ground in operations to judge what might happen and what might not happen. Can you imagine what would have happened if they'd done nothing and then we'd had some obstruction on the parade, or worse?
But where's the line drawn between
difficult.
peaceful protests? I mean, does a megaphone change the situation? He's allowed to go in Trafalgar Square and shout against the monarchy on a megaphone, isn't he?
Well, yes, absolutely. And when
Same
you
as
look at
Steve Bray's been doing it for years.
and when you look at the legislation, you've got inbuilt to it the fact that police have to take into account freedom of expression and weigh all these things up, this important right that we all have, before taking action. Now,
But the Tories have been blamed for being overzealous with this legislation on protest. Do you think they're using a sledgehammer to crack a nut here?
No, I supported this legislation.
Okay.
In fact, I was the minister who helped put it through, and I think it was absolutely right we did so.
Okay.
Because I can tell you, we'd be up to for a lot of criticism. The police would be in the dock if they let something happen and the parade was obstructed, or worse, horses were frightened.
Scared. No, I know.
We can't. That's not safe.
Right. Before you go, with time ticking, I must ask you about the local election results. I mean, the expectation management was at 1,000 because CCHQ obviously hoped it would be well below that. In fact, the losses of seats across England exceeded 1,000. It's an absolute disaster for the Tories, isn't it, Robert?
Well, look, it was a very bad day. I'm not going to gloss over it. I've seen days like this before, and I've seen how the Conservative Party learns and recovers from it. That's the key thing now. We've got to listen to what people are saying to us. We've got to do better, and we've got to press on. I think Rishi's getting it right.
But
we
if the
need to
swing that
press on
happened
in
in
the fight against
Swindon
inflation.
on a local level was reciprocated when it comes to the general election, you'd lose your seat.
Well, I know that.
Do you think you're going to lose your seat?
No, I don't, because
You worried about it?
Of course I do, but I've never been complacent about my seat. I've never had a safe seat. My seat is a marginal one, always has been, which is why I work year in, year out with local residents to try and solve their problems and try and be a vigorous representative.
CCHQ up to scratch? Because I heard a lot of anecdotal evidence last week that the Tories weren't campaigning hard enough in key areas.
Well, locally we were working very, very hard on the ground. I think, just as we're learning lessons, I'm sure CCHQ will as well, and we'll be ready for that general election when it comes next year.
So, Robert Buckland, very, very much wonderful to see you this morning.
Thank you.
Might see you again later, but we'll keep that slightly secret.